Forget soft-spoken pleasantries or synthesized perfection. We're about tales imbued with the scent of oxidation, stale coffee, and very real repercussions here. I'm Don Diego, and this is my digital persona. As the creator of this original science fiction narrative, I invite you to settle in and crank up the audio. Our current installment sees a veteran emerging from a cryo prison after 3 decades and returning to a deserted outpost, only to hear an archaic phone ring. The cryot transport vessel impacted the landing pad at Kepler's Drift punctually at 0682 local time. The arrival was far from gentle, marked by a formidable shuddering thud, indicative of industrial hydraulics struggling against gravity and barely succeeding. Peering through the scuffed viewport, the distant sun was just beginning to stain the horizon, casting the dense, swirling methane clouds in hues of bloated purple and a reluctant, sickly gold. Douglas Beckham remained in his seat as the restraint harness disengaged with a pneumatic exhalation. He was the sole passenger. He rose, his knees audibly cracking in the sudden pervasive silence of the cabin. From the overhead compartment, he retrieved a sole, military-issue duffel bag. Its canvas felt coarse beneath his fingers, cold to the touch, and it carried the distinct, omnipresent aroma of penal colonies, freezer burn, recycled air, and a nostril-searing institutional disinfectant. Inside, he had one set of clothes, folded with meticulous, almost obsessive precision. He also possessed a comb he had fashioned from synthetic bone during the protracted, lucid intervals between cryocycles. 52 credits, deposited on a chip no bigger than his thumbnail, represented the entirety of his pension after legal fees had divested him of everything else. And then there was a key. A genuine, tangible key, crafted from brass and ancient, its teeth worn smooth from 30 years of being clutched in a fist that refused to unclench. During those fleeting, agonizing moments when the cryo system would partially rouse him to prevent neural decay, that key had served as his steadfast anchor. It was the only thing that felt substantial. 3 decades spent gripping that metallic object, like a drowning man grasping at flotsam, rotating it repeatedly in fingers that were not quite frozen, yet never fully alert. The shuttle pilot, a woman with engine grease beneath her nails and eyes that had witnessed too many prisoner transfers, observed him from the cockpit. She uttered no words, simply offering him quote, _0_. Douglas had encountered it myriad times, reflected in the reinforced panels of his cell block. It was the gaze civilians offered when mentally itemizing your transgressions. A look that declared your guilt already presumed, irrespective of what the release documentation asserted. Douglas stepped into the airlock. At 64 years of age, his biological clock had perhaps logged only 3 of those years in an awakened state. The remainder had been pilfered, preserved within the gelatinous dormancy of ice. His hair had bleached completely white. Technicians had mumbled something about cellular stress and cortisol surges during the preservation process. But Douglas understood better. It wasn't stress. It was the hue of the void. His hands, once steady enough to solder microfuses on navigation arrays while the hull shuddered under enemy fire, now possessed a subtle, rhythmic tremor. The thin atmosphere of the drift gnawed at his exposed skin, yet his eyes remained unaltered. They were gray-green, the flat, unreflective shade of military hull plating, sharp as shattered glass, and utterly devoid of any semblance of clemency. He advanced onto the walkway. The settlement of Beckham's Point had surprisingly little changed over the 30-year span. A realization that struck him as both a kindness and a cruelty. The identical prefabricated habitation units still hunkered along the primary thoroughfare, resembling hefty, corroded beetles huddling for warmth. Their solar panels were now a patchwork, a mosaic of mismatched photovoltaic cells that spoke volumes of scarcity and desperate repairs. The atmospheric processors maintained their incessant, vibrating thrum, a sound perceptible in the teeth more than heard by the ears. And then there was the branding. The Kovacs Corporation logo blazed from every official surface. That stylized, aggressive K that appeared less like a letter and more like a knife carving through a planetary body. It adorned the water reclamation tower. It was emblazoned on the transit hub. It was even visible on the chests of the few workers trudging towards the mines. Their heads bowed. Douglas began to walk. His magnetic boots, antiquated and heavy, crunched on the deteriorating ferrocrete walkway. Clank, grind, clank. Each step propelled small clouds of accumulated dust that swirled in the low gravity before settling onto his trousers. He knew precisely where he was headed. He had traversed this path 1,000 times in the fragmented, feverish dreams of the cryo tank. In those nightmarish seconds when the system would malfunction, and he would briefly surface, just enough to feel the cold, to sense the passage of time, to feel his existence leaching away into the darkness. He had walked this very route. Sometimes the dream had been sweet. Music. In the most favorable visions, he would step through the airlock and be greeted by the scent of freshly brewed coffee. The control console would radiate with the gleam of amber indicator lights. Fuel reserves would be completely replenished. His daughter's voice would echo from the back room, inquiring if he desired breakfast before the morning hustle. Yet most evenings, the dream diverged. Frequently he would arrive to find the location obliterated, a mere crater, or dismantled for its components. The copper wiring would be torn from the walls, like sinews from a body, or simply vanished from existence, a blank space on the map, as if his entire life had been an illusion prior to the tribunal, before the gavel descended, before the ice claimed him. It took him 28 minutes to traverse from the landing pad to the periphery of the settlement, where the gravel transitioned into dirt, and the ancient service road branched off towards the Beckham family outpost. His feet instinctively recalled the route, even as his thoughts wandered. He moved past the dilapidated school dome, now caked in such a thick layer of grime that its windows were opaque. He continued past the memorial field, deliberately averting his gaze from the markers. He knew who rested there, his wife. Her headstone was among dozens commemorating those lost in the catastrophe, an incident that conveniently eradicated everyone who might have testified on his behalf. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, his jaw so tightly clenched that his teeth ached. He journeyed past the Kovacs mining facility, which had expanded considerably. The automated extractors loomed over the terrain like skeletal titans, vast and insatiable, their intake vents roaring as they devoured the planet's crust. No human operators were visible, only the relentless mastication of the machines. And then, finally, the road curved. There it was. The sign hung askew above the primary structure. Its suspension cables were slack and corroded. The lettering, scoured by sandstorms and neglect, had faded to near illegibility. Quote 1. It was the very sign his grandfather had painstakingly crafted by hand, when Kepler's drift was merely a surveyor's marking on a colonial chart, a period predating corporations before the onset of avarice. Douglas halted. The silence out here was oppressive, pressing against his eardrums. His throat constricted. A physical tightness unrelated to the atmosphere. The outpost mirrored his most dreadful nightmares. The two fuel arms at the front had frozen into sculptures of industrial decay, their articulated joints locked at odd, unnatural angles, like fractured limbs. The energy conduits, once encased in protective yellow shielding, were now cracked and dark, exposing the dull copper beneath. What had once been gleaming teal indicator lights now flickered erratically, a weak, irregular pulse, like the dying heartbeat of something stubbornly refusing to completely expire. The windows were obscured by 3 decades of atmospheric residue. Weeds, genuine Earth-origin weeds, tough and unsightly, likely introduced on contaminated cargo decades ago, had forced their way through every fissure in the ferrocrete foundation. They thrived in thick, suffocating clusters, enveloping the base of the pumps. The building itself sagged in its middle. The white thermal paint, once so pristine that his mother had joked it resembled fresh snowfall on a grimy world, had faded to a grayish brown. It peeled away in long, jagged strips that curled like shedding skin. It looked like a cadaver. It looked like something that had perished long ago and been left to decompose where it fell. Douglas compelled his legs to move. He walked towards it regardless. He had nowhere else to go. As he neared the main entrance, passing a heap of twisted scrap metal that might once have been a generator, something stirred in the debris. It was small. It was orange. It was caked in 3 decades of accumulated grime, grease, and dust. But it was unmistakably mechanical. Quote 2, Douglas whispered. The name felt alien on his tongue. A specter from another existence. The pile of junk shifted. A robotic cat's optical sensors sprang to life, first one, then the other. The lenses irised open with a sound akin to rusty scissors scraping through sandpaper. Snick grind. The orange copper casing was dented in numerous places. A jagged scratch marred its left flank. One of the cat's rear leg servos clicked ominously. Quote 4, as it attempted to stand. But the personality core, the core was intact. Douglas knew because the first thing Barullo did was fix its gaze upon him, tilt its head, and emit a sound that fell somewhere between a dying accordion and a malfunctioning door alarm. Underscore, quote underscore 5, underscore. Douglas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He let his duffel bag drop into the dust. Yeah, he rasped, his voice rough, scraping against his throat. Missed you too, you stupid bucket of bolts. Barullo stretched, a symphony of mechanical pops and whirs accompanying its movement. It settled down neatly, disregarding the grating protest of a dry hip joint, and started trying to preen a spot of rust from its shoulder with a rough, synthetic tongue. After a moment, the feline's voice synthesizer sputtered to life. Its sound was faint, filled with static, but the intonation was unmistakable. Quote 8, Barullo declared. The volume was a bit too loud. The gain control was likely corroded. Its tone managed to convey an immense, regal judgment. Quote 9. Quote 10. Douglas remarked, stepping nearer. Quote 11. Barullo sneezed, a sharp burst of compressed air that expelled a small cloud of dust from his nasal sensors. Quote 12. Douglas almost smiled. Almost. The muscles in his face felt stiff, unaccustomed to such an expression. He hadn't created Barullo to be a companion. He had built him as a diagnostic assistant, a tool for identifying mechanical failures in fuel systems too intricate for human vision. But somewhere along the line, the neural network and learning algorithms had cultivated what could only be described as a distinct personality. A personality primarily comprising sarcasm, unsolicited remarks, and an inexplicable, fierce aversion to the color yellow. "The key still fits," Douglas murmured, more to himself than to the cat, as he approached the door. The brass key slid into the manual override slot on the main airlock. It felt gritty, the mechanism dry. He turned it. There was resistance, then a soft click. The sound was deafening in the silence. It was the sound of the past unlocking. The door was jammed, swollen from decades of thermal cycling, its seals fused by heat and cold. Douglas braced his shoulder against it. He felt the ache in his cryo-damaged joints, a sharp jolt of pain in his hip, but he ignored it. He gritted his teeth and pushed. The door groaned open, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the building. It swung inward, releasing a breath of stale air that rushed out to greet him. The smell struck him like a physical blow. It smelled of lubricant and dust, of ozone and decay. But beneath that, something else lingered. The ghost of coffee, the chemical tang of fuel cells, the faint, sweet scent of the vanilla air freshener his daughter used to hide in the vents. He stepped inside. "Smells like failure and regret," Barullo observed, slinking in behind him, his metal paws clicking on the floor plates. "Also rodents. There are definitely space rodents. I can hear them judging us. Their judgment is inferior to mine, but it is still present." The morning light struggled through the grimy windows, casting long, murky beams across the room. Douglas stood in the doorway and allowed his eyes to adjust, letting the memories wash over him. The control console remained, buried under dust so thick it resembled grey felt, a shroud over defunct machinery. The old navigation computer, a heavy industrial unit inherited from his father, a monstrous machine with manual toggle switches and a cathode ray monitor, sat precisely where he had left it the morning the colonial authority arrived. He could discern the outlines of the diagnostic equipment beneath their coating of grime, still lined up in a row, awaiting hands that would never touch them again. And there on the wall behind the console, exactly as it had always been, was the emergency communication terminal. It was ancient technology, a hardline uplink system from the early colonial days, before wireless communication and orbital networks. His grandfather had insisted on keeping it operational. "You never know when the network will fail," he used to say. "You never know when the sky will go dark, and you'll need something that runs on copper and ground." The terminal had been disconnected 30 years ago. Douglas knew this for a fact. The colonial authority had severed all communications when they condemned the property. They had cut the lines. He had seen the work order. But as he walked toward it, leaving dark footprints in the thick dust of the floor, he noticed something peculiar. A small red indicator light was blinking. Blink, pause, blink, pause. "That should not be possible," Barullo stated, his servos whirring as he followed Douglas's gaze, voicing the thought that echoed in Douglas's mind. That terminal was disconnected. I watched them do it. I recorded the entire procedure for posterity, and also as evidence of bureaucratic incompetence. The technician was named Steve. He was incompetent. I know, Douglas said. The hard line was physically cut. There is no way for a signal to... I know. Douglas reached out, his hand trembling. He swiped away a layer of dust from the console's facade, his fingers leaving distinct, clean black streaks against the gray surface. The persistent, impossible blinking light continued. Music, a prolonged wait. Underscore, quote, underscore. 22, underscore. Barullo inquired, his voice unusually hushed, the characteristic sarcasm entirely absent. Douglas's thoughts drifted to his father. He recalled the frail, dying man in the medical bay, who, in his final moments of clarity, had gripped Douglas's hand with surprising force. Quote, 23. His father had whispered, his breath ragged, quote, 24. He had made the promise, though he hadn't grasped its significance then, attributing it to the delirium of a dying mind. Yet 3 decades of cryosleep had instilled one crucial lesson in Douglas. Logic was a luxury. Sometimes one simply had to act without fully comprehending the universe's mechanics. He pressed the receive button. The plastic key was stiff, offering resistance before finally yielding with a weighty clack. A roar of static erupted from the speakers, a testament to distance, to time, to a signal battling through interference. It seemingly shouldn't have overcome. A blizzard of white noise. Then a voice pierced through the cacophony. Dad, if you're hearing this, please listen. I don't have much time. Douglas's knees buckled. He didn't fall, but he snatched the console edge to maintain his upright posture, his knuckles turning white as he clenched the metal. It was Margot, his daughter, officially dead for 23 years, victims of the same industrial accident that had claimed his wife and all others who might have stood in his defense. Underscore, quote, underscore 26, underscore. Margot's voice continued, the recording crackling with the wear of age and compression artifacts, making her sound as if speaking from underwater or a vast distance away. If you're hearing it, then the terminal's tampering sensors detected your specific biometrics, which means you're finally home, which means they let you out, which means maybe there's still a chance. Temporal anchor recording, Barullo murmured, his voice processor dialed to its lowest, barely audible setting. I have read about these old tech pre-ET network messages stored in hardened memory, buried in the system architecture. Set to activate only on specific triggers. It is ingenious. Dad, I found out what really happened, Margot said, her voice now rapid, breathless. The Kovacs Corporation, they needed our land, not for the fuel rights. They don't care about the refueling station. It's what's underneath. There's something in the old storage cavern. Something valuable beyond anything they've ever found on the outer colonies. A geological anomaly. And they knew you'd never sell. They knew Grandpa would never sell. So they framed you for the sabotage. They killed the witnesses. They put you in cryo so you couldn't fight back. A surge of static swallowed her words for a moment. Douglas stared at the speaker mesh, his heart thundering against his ribs like a captive bird. Documents are in the secure cache, her voice returned, fainter now. I hid them before they came for me. I hid everything. More static. Password is the name of my first cat, the real one, before Bulow. Before everything went wrong. Before me. Barullo's voice spiked, betraying what might have been genuine hurt. There was a cat before me? This is new information. I am processing betrayal. Shh, Douglas hissed. Dad, Margot's voice grew urgent, trembling. He could now discern the fear in it. She was crying. I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. But you have to find the evidence. You have to prove what they did. For Mom, for Grandpa, for everyone they erased. A heavy pounding on a door, accompanied by shouts, became audible in the recording's background. They're here, she whispered. Goodbye, Dad. The line went dead. The static ceased, leaving a silence so profound, it felt as if all air had been pulled from the room. Douglas stood paralyzed, clutching the inert terminal. 30 years of cryosleep. 30 years of being branded a saboteur, a traitor, a murderer of 300 colonists. 30 years of bearing the crushing weight of a crime he did not commit, while the true culprits grew wealthy and powerful on the backs of the dead. He closed his eyes. He could picture her face, not the woman she would have become, but the 12-year-old girl with grease on her cheeks, running through the outpost. Whiskers, he finally said, the word a whisper that resonated like a shout in the profound silence. I beg your pardon? Barullo inquired. The password, Douglas stated, opening his eyes. His gray-green irises were now rigid. Grief had been flash-frozen into something sharp and useful. My daughter's first cat was named Whiskers. She was 8 years old. It was a stray that wandered in from the docks. She had absolutely no imagination for names. Whiskers, Barullo repeated, testing the word. How refreshingly mundane. The feline is statistically the third most common of its kind in the area. Where is this secure cache? Douglas surveyed the dilapidated outpost, taking in the peeling paint, abundant dust, and general decay. His gaze lingered on the life that had been forcibly taken from him. The storage cavern, Douglas stated. Underground, a deep storage unit, where my father kept dangerous isotopes and truly vital equipment. He paused, his jaw tightening, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Where Kovac believed there was nothing but solid rock. Ah, Barullo's tail swished, kicking up a small dust cloud. The servos in his neck whirred as he swiveled towards the window. Then we should probably accelerate our timetable, because according to my external sensors, which I might add are still superior to your biological eyes, we have visitors, 3 vehicles approaching rapidly. Kovac corporate security markings. They are not driving in a way that suggests a friendly call. Douglas didn't hesitate or panic. He had unconsciously anticipated this moment for 3 decades. He had endured the cold and the dark, keenly aware of time slipping away like blood from a wound. He had waited as his wife died. He had waited as his daughter died. He had waited as everyone he loved was eradicated from existence. He was done waiting. Barullo, he uttered, his voice flat, cold, and utterly resolute. Where's my old toolkit? Quote 55. Back storage room. Quote 56 third shelf, behind the emergency ration boxes that expired 22 years ago. Do not consume those. They will kill you faster than the security team. Also, there's a pulse rifle. You concealed it inside a decorative ceiling tile in the pantry before your arrest. Did you imagine I would forget? I never forget. My memory is replicated across 3 separate drives. I was hoping you'd remember, Beckham. Come out with your hands visible. You are trespassing on Kovac's property. This is factually incorrect. This property is legally registered to the Beckham Family Trust. I have the documentation in my memory banks. Would you like me to recite the relevant clauses? There are 473 of them. I can begin with the subsection 4, paragraph B. Shut that thing up. Victor, you look exactly like your father. That is not a compliment. And you look like a corpse that forgot to stay buried. You should be in cryo, old man. Got released. Good behavior. Funny thing about cryo sentences. Eventually they end. Even when certain corporations spend a lot of money trying to ensure they don't. Victor's face flushed a dark, ugly red. You have no idea what you're talking about. I think I do. I think your father murdered 300 people to frame me for sabotage. I think he did it because my family possessed the only thing preventing him from accessing whatever is buried beneath this rock. Please, please, Beckham, I'll give you money. I'll give you anything. Name your price. I possess untraceable accounts in the inner systems, millions. Your father killed my wife. He killed my daughter. He killed 300 innocent people, simply to seize what was rightfully mine. And you carried on his legacy. You bribed judges. You fabricated evidence. You ensured I remained confined in a box for 3 decades, while you prospered from my family's land. You signed the renewal orders for my incarceration every single year. Did you even bother to read my name, or was I merely an item on a spreadsheet? I didn't. I was just... My father made me, Victor choked, snot dripping onto his upper lip. Your father is deceased. You made your own choices. Douglas raised the rifle, aiming it directly at the center of Victor's forehead. Victor clenched his eyes shut, releasing a whimper that would shame his ancestors. A dark stain began to spread across the front of his trousers. Douglas watched him, his finger resting on the trigger. It would be so simple. A slight pressure, a flash of light. It would all be over. The pent-up rage of 3 decades impelled him to act. But then he heard the echo of Margot's voice from the recording. Prove what they did. For Mom, for Grandpa. Killing Victor would achieve nothing. It would only confirm the murderer they always claimed him to be. Open your eyes, Douglas commanded. Victor blinked, tears streaming down his face, astonished to still be alive. I'm not going to kill you, Douglas said softly. The promise was more frightening than any threat. Death is too quick. Death is a release. You don't get to leave. You are going to log into your corporate network right now. You are going to release every document connected to the Beckham case, every bribe, every falsified safety report, every communication between your family and the colonial authority concerning the accident, and you are going to upload it to the public colonial newsfeed. I can't. It will ruin the company, the board, the shareholders. I don't care about your shareholders, Douglas stated. He tilted the rifle barrel. Do it, or I leave you out here for the night cycle. The temperature drops to 40 degrees below zero, and the scavengers emerge. I hear they start with the soft parts. Victor fumbled for the datapad, his fingers slick with sweat. The process consumed 3 hours. Douglas stood over him the entire time, observing the screen, watching the progress bars. The sun ascended higher in the purple sky, scorching the ferrocrete. Yet Douglas remained unperturbed by the heat. He felt cold, like a statue carved from ice. He watched as the files uploaded, bank transfers to judges, recorded voice memos detailing how to handle the Beckham problem, a comprehensive geological survey from 31 years prior, identifying a massive deposit of rare crystalline compounds, vital for hyperdrive navigation systems, buried beneath the outpost. This deposit was worth more than most planetary economies. The Kovacs had committed murder for it. They had annihilated an entire family for it. Despite its presence, the cache remained untouched because Douglas's father, with a touch of paranoid brilliance, had sealed the subterranean chamber using biometric locks responsive solely to Beckham DNA. For 3 decades, the fortune lay dormant, secured by a deceased man's tenacity, awaiting the rightful heir's return from oblivion. It's done. Every last bit of it is out there. News feeds are already picking up the story. Upload complete. Good. Now, start walking. Walking where? To the settlement. It's 6 kilometers. You might just make it before the Colonial Marshal's security drones apprehend you. They'll be coming for you, Victor. And unlike your personal guards, they aren't susceptible to bribes. I've got you, he whispered. I'm not leaving you behind this time. You look terrible. Shut up. I'm concentrating. My head was shot off, Douglas. I am permitted to comment on appearances. Burrillow's newly installed optical sensors whirred as they focused, zooming in on Douglas's face. Also, you are crying. I'm not crying. Your tear ducts are producing saline fluid. I can detect the moisture levels. Unless you are sweating from your eyeballs, which would be a concerning medical condition indicating total systemic failure, you are crying. I built you when my daughter was 12. She wanted a cat, a real one, but we couldn't afford the import permits, and the synthetic biological models were garbage, so I said I'd build her one instead. It took me 2 years. By the time I finished, she had gone off to university on Mars. She never really bonded with you the way I hoped she would. She called me a bucket of bolts once. I believe it was affectionate. Although her tone suggested exasperation. Underscore, quote, underscore 1, 1, 0, underscore. It wasn't affectionate, Douglas said, a sad smile touching his lips. But I did bond with you. I mean, you were the only thing I had left after they took everything else. The only piece of my old life that survived the fire. The only thing that remembered her. I survived because I am superior to organic beings in every measurable way, Barullo declared, puffing out his metallic chest. You survived because you're too annoying to die. Also true. Annoyance is a survival strategy. Friendly, female, advanced in years, elevated cardiac rhythm, carrying a receptacle of organic matter. It appears to be a variety of casserole. I object to casseroles on principle. Textural analysis indicates mushiness. Molly Reeves, you worked at the commissary then? Back when your family operated this establishment? Back when your wife brought coffee cake to community gatherings? Back when this settlement was a true community, not merely a Kovac corporate outpost? Quote 121 I saw the news feeds. Quote 122. Everyone did. Viktor Kovac's arrest at the spaceport. The released documents. The truth about the sabotage. She swallowed hard, I thought you might be hungry." Douglas accepted the container. Its warmth radiated through his hand. It felt like an offering of peace from another realm. "I believed you were guilty," Molly confessed, her voice raspy with remorse. She cast her gaze downwards at her boots. "For 3 decades, Douglas, I considered you a monster. We all did. It was simpler than confronting the possibility that our entire existence was built on a lie. It was easier to blame you than to question the Kovacs' immense wealth. I'm sorry, Douglas. So sorry. You couldn't have known. I should have probed further. We all should have, but we didn't. And now we owe you. This entire settlement owes you. You and your family, for what was inflicted upon you. For what we allowed to happen." She gestured towards the distant lights of the settlement. "Some of us were talking. The old guard. There's a lot that needs doing here. Repairs, rebuilding, cleansing 30 years of Kovacs' negligence. We thought, if you were agreeable, we could lend a hand. The mad bomber Douglas Beckham. Ancient space refueling outpost. Beckham Family Proprietors. Since 2147. You are welding that incorrectly. The specifications unequivocally indicate a 45-degree angle. That is 43 degrees at best. Do you desire the fuel arm to collapse, resulting in our collective demise? Because that is precisely how fuel arms collapse and result in our collective demise. I have simulated the scenarios. They are gruesome. Your cat is rather intense. He's always been that way," Douglas said, wiping grease from his hands. "I programmed him to be helpful." "That's helpful?" Quote 139. It's his interpretation of helpful. You get accustomed to it. The memorial service took place 3 months after Douglas's return. It honored not only his wife and daughter, but everyone who had perished in the sabotage. 300 names were read aloud in the settlement's gathering hall. A bell tolled for each individual. The survivors sat in mournful silence, weeping for what had been stolen from them, for the years lost to greed. Viktor Kovac observed the proceedings through a secured video link from his cell aboard the prison vessel, transporting him to the galactic periphery. The evidence amassed by Douglas and Barullo was conclusive, leading to a 2-week trial. His sentence was life imprisonment without parole, to be served in a cryostasis facility on Titan, a place strikingly similar to where Douglas himself had spent 3 decades. Douglas opted not to attend the sentencing. There was no need. For him, justice wasn't about reveling in an enemy's suffering or the gratification of seeing them shackled. It was about obtaining the freedom to build something superior. Independent surveyors evaluated the crystalline deposit beneath the outpost at 7.2 billion credits. Douglas transferred the mining rights to a trust designated for the families of those affected by the sabotage. He retained sufficient funds to rehabilitate the outpost and establish an emergency maintenance reserve. The remainder, the immense fortune Kovac had murdered for, was directed to those who had endured the greatest loss. It funded schools, hospitals, and a future for Kepler's drift that was not dictated by corporate overlords. Billions were not his desire. He possessed what he truly needed. On the 1-year mark of his release, Douglas stood on the refurbished landing pad, watching the dawn break over Kepler's drift. The atmosphere was crisp, and the outpost shone behind him, not brand new, but reinvigorated, reclaimed. Vessels already formed a queue in the upper atmosphere, awaiting fuel. A steady procession of travelers, cargo haulers, and explorers sought respite and replenishment. They arrived for the inexpensive hydrogen, yet lingered for the coffee, perhaps hoping to hear the tale of a man who pursued justice for 30 years. "You're becoming sentimental again, Memlin. I detect elevated serotonin and oxytocin levels. It's quite unbecoming. You resemble a sentimental greeting card." "Margot's birthday was today," Douglas murmured, his gaze fixed on the purple clouds. He did not look down. "She would have been 47. "Ah." Barullo's tail swayed slowly, its mechanism now silent and flawlessly lubricated. "I have her recorded message archived, the one from the terminal." "Would you like to?" "No, but thank you." Douglas reached out, stroking behind Barullo's audio receptors. The drone leaned into the touch, its servos humming with a deep, rhythmic vibration. "She'd be proud, I think, of what we built here, what we saved. You saved it. I merely offered tactical guidance and devastatingly critical observations. Couldn't have done it without you. Evidently, I am, of course, indispensable." Barullo rose, stretching his mechanical joints with a series of gratifying clicks. "Now, if your emotional display is concluded, there is a freight transport requesting fuel on Pad 7. Their captain appears exceedingly impatient and is also wearing a yellow shirt. I intend to overcharge them for the aesthetic offense." Douglas almost cracked a smile. "Don't be cruel. I am never cruel. I am merely precisely as inconvenient as the scenario mandates. Also, the yellow is genuinely hideous. Some things cannot be forgiven. You did good, Margot. You saved me. You saved all of us." The terminal remained silent, but deep within the outpost's restored systems, embedded in the antiquated wiring Douglas had scrupulously preserved, a tiny red indicator light blinked once. Blink. It was merely a glitch. The kind of anomaly inherent in old equipment. A power surge, a spectral presence in the machinery most likely. Douglas observed the scene, a faint smile gracing his lips as he raised his coffee cup for a sip. Outside, Buru was engaged in a spirited pursuit of a space rodent across the landing area, his voice box emitting a colorful barrage of insults, audible for 3 sectors. A transport pilot was heard griping about fuel costs, while 2 young mechanics bickered over the correct tensile strength for atmospheric seals. It was a cacophony, yet it was also vibrant. It was deeply familiar, like home itself. My dear friends, after 3 decades of anticipating this reckoning, I found it utterly magnificent. Unadulterated justice, stark and unembellished, precisely as the cosmos favors it. But what are your thoughts? Did the feline companion steal the show? Or is Douglas simply extraordinarily resilient? Share your insights below. I crave the unvarnished truth. If this resonated with you, you know the routine. Like, share, and expand our audience. Now, whatever you do, don't depart, because the next musical piece is truly the very essence of this narrative. Increase the volume. Signing off. Music. They claim time is currency, but they omit the exchange rate for a life unjustly taken. Music, 30 years confined. Music, dreams frozen in a glacial slumber. Awakening to a world where boundaries blurred. Music, the suffering receded. Music, my arm deteriorated to rust, and cherished names faded into memory. A figure in a suit and tie attempted to buy his way out, but a pulse rifle's whisper conveyed what legal counsel cannot. Music. Indeed, I financially ravaged them. Music. My billions cannot warm a cryo-chamber. Music, vengeance is a dish best served on a platter of cold steel, when only the rust on the wheel remains loyal. Music. The wealthiest person here is merely a phantom within the system. Music. If humanity exists in this desolate place, I discovered more soul in a dented orange container. A rudimentary robot with a lie detector, in contrast to a man whose vital signs concealed dead, vacant eyes. He pleaded for his life, offering vast sums of gold. Music. I chose the truth instead, for the tale to be recounted. Music. Now the outpost gleams, travelers find respite, yet a block of life persists within my chest. You can reconstruct the barriers, you can cleanse the stains, but you cannot purchase passage back to the past. Music. Therefore, retain your credits, keep your silo pearls. I shall remain here, a madman, a phantom, and a magnificent cat. Music. Yes, keep the chains.